Right. Coffee in hand? Let me try something with you. So think about the last 10 ads that you saw, the ones that made you stop scrolling or look up at the television or actually click on the link. Now, try to bring those ads to front of mind. How many of them featured a woman over 50 and not as a mum in the kitchen or not advertising wrinkle cream and not as a slightly confused grandma being shown how to use a smartphone? I mean, as the actual person that the ad was for. Now, if you got to one, you're doing extremely well. If you got to zero, you're not alone. And that's what I want to talk about today. So, welcome to Unfiltered and Unbound. I'm Kate, and this is a coffee break episode. So, just you, me, and a topic that I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks since doing some research for it. And part of this is actually inspired by Kylie Jones of 50 and Fearless. So today we're talking about the invisible market, specifically women over 50 and the fact that this demographic, our demographic, holds an enormous share of consumer spending power and household wealth in this country and globally and gets almost none of the advertising attention. So we are, statistically speaking, one of the most economically powerful groups on the planet, and brands act like we don't exist. So I want to unpack the numbers because some of these numbers are just like seriously insane. And I want to talk about why this is happening and what I want to focus on, what I think we can actually do about it, because I don't think this is a problem that fixes itself. So grab your coffee and let's go. So let me hit you with the headline figure first and a caveat on some of these stats. The numbers are easier to find in US and UK research than in Australian sources, but the pattern is consistent across markets. Women over 50 control an estimated 15 trillion US dollars in global spending power. That's 15 trillion. You heard that right. They, and I should say we because I'm in this demographic too, account for around 27% of all consumer spending. That's 3% more than men of the same age. So we control 95% of household purchasing decisions, 80% of luxury travel decisions, and women over 50 are the largest demographic with incomes over 100,000 US dollars. So across the board, and this is the Boston Consulting Group's number, women make or influence 85% of consumer decisions overall. Now, in the UK, the over 50s control nearly 70% of all household wealth. Women over 45 account for just over half of all consumer spending. And 82% of women aged 50 plus say they're open to trying new brands. 75% say they're willing to pay more for quality, and 75% are willing to pay more for convenience. So think about that for a minute. We are open and we do have the money, we're willing to spend it. Well, we are on paper every marketer's dream customer, right? So you'd expect to see us everywhere. You'd expect that the advertising industry, which exists for one reason, which is to find people with money and persuade them to spend it, would be falling over themselves to talk to us. Here's what actually happens. So in the US, the share of advertising dollars targeted directly at women over 50 is between 3 and 4%. 3 to 4% of advertising spend for a group that controls 27% of consumer spending with trillions of dollars in wealth. The math is just not mathing. In the UK, just 12% of ads feature an over 50 in a leading role at all. And the people actually making those ads, only 6% of UK ad agency staff are over 50. And it drops further in creative departments. So the rooms where the briefs are actually written and where the concepts are developed and where the decisions are made about who is in the picture and who isn't. So compare this to medicine, where about 28% of practitioners are over 50. Science, 30%. Law, 35%. Advertising is one of the youngest skewed professional industries on the planet, and we are seeing the consequences of that on our screens every single day. One interesting stat from Nielsen, Nielsen estimates that less than 5% of advertising dollars are targeted to adults aged 35 to 64. The marketing industry has decided collectively, without really discussing it with us, that you stop being commercially interesting at 49, the age at which, by every measurable metric, you actually start to have money. Now, in fairness, brands do occasionally try And when they do, they tend to fall into one of two traps. So trap one is the anti-aging frame. So treating aging itself as the problem to be solved. The whole language of anti-aging assumes that we're degrading and that the brand is there to slow that degradation. So the data on this is consistent and damning. 77% of women over 45 say advertising contributes to negative perceptions of aging. 46% of women going through or past menopause believe women are not represented fairly or authentically, and 44% feel patronised. Trap 2, we'll call it the frumpy default. So bamboo basics, loose silhouettes, soft lighting, the mature ladies aisle. So comfort wear that quietly suggests we have stopped caring about how we look when we actually haven't. We just don't want to wear what we wore at 22. Now, there's a fashion designer in Australia, Ali Leonard, who wrote a piece for Mamma Mia that summed it up better than I could. She said, midlife women aren't asking for more, we're asking for better. And there is a third pattern that I want to flag. A Psychology Today analysis last year documented a wardrobe quiz aimed at women over 50 that returned the result invisible and outdated. So regardless of how the user answered the questions. And then upsold styling services. So the product was telling women they were invisible and then charging them to fix it. That's not marketing. That is manufacturing insecurity. So 45% of women agree that society expects them to vanish from public life as they get older. So vanish, disappear, become invisible. And I want to be clear here. That is not a feeling that we invented. That is something that we have been told over and over by an industry that has decided we are just not worth the effort. So what do women in our demographic actually want from brands? Because the research is unusually consistent on this. We're not asking for anything outlandish. So 96% of women over 50 say they have a clear sense of their own identity. A third describe themselves as very confident in their own skin, and multiple studies report that women in their 50s and 60s say these are among the happiest decades of their lives. So the decline framing that advertising leans on is not coming from us, it's being projected onto us. Now, we're not asking for special treatment, and we're not asking for an older woman aisle. We're asking to be marketed to as full consumers, as women who exercise, who travel, who buy tech, who upgrade their cars, who renovate, who invest, who go to concerts, who change careers, and who wear activewear in public without an apology. 52% of women over 55 say they are open to switching brands and trying new things. That directly contradicts the set in their ways stereotype that the industry seems to be working from. 60% of growth in the cosmetics and beauty category over the next decade is forecast to come from women aged 50 and over. 60% of an entire category's growth from us. And here's a thing I want to say to anyone listening who works in marketing or branding, or who has any kind of say over who appears in your company's campaigns. If your brief stops at age 49, you are leaving money on the table, provably, measurably, and by the trillion. So let me give you the hopeful bit, because there are brands getting this right and they're absolutely thumping it commercially. So Dove, the Real Beauty platform, and specifically the Pro Age campaign back in 2007, which is almost 20 years ago. So featured women over 50, photographed by Annie Leibovitz without airbrushing. So there were age spots, wrinkles, grey hair, all of it. The broader Real Beauty platform drove a decade of consecutive sales growth and eventually made Dove the biggest brand inside Unilever. And I want to be honest about something here because I do think it matters. A lot of the big legacy beauty brands have started doing campaigns featuring women over 50, but they are still selling us anti-aging. The model in the imagery is older. The product on the shelf is still framed as a way to slow the inevitable disaster of getting older. That is not getting it right. That is putting more flattering filter on the same insulting message. If a brand is featuring a beautiful 60-year-old in their ad, but the product is called age-defying or youth-restoring or wrinkle-correcting, they are not on our side. They are on a more sophisticated version of the same side they've always been on. So I want to point at the brands and the people who are genuinely getting it right, because they tend to be smaller, founder-led, and not in the legacy beauty machine. And then there's the rise of the over 50 influencer category. So women like Lynn Slater or Stephanie Glover, who have built audiences in the hundreds of thousands and millions on Instagram and TikTok. And the bit that really interested me is that their followers actually skew younger than expected. So predominantly women under 40 who want to see with their own eyes that getting older doesn't mean disappearing. So the audience for honest representation of women over 50 is not just us, it's also our daughters. And closer to home in Australia, Kylie Jones, who runs 50 and Fearless, has built an Instagram following of around a million precisely by speaking to and about this demographic the way it should always have been spoken to. And there are Australian brands that are founder led by women in our demographic, building product for women in our demographic. What do we actually do with all of this? Because I don't want this episode just to be a recitation of it upsetting statistics, although that's probably what it sounds like so far. So there's three things, and I'm going to keep this really practical. One, take notice of it. Genuinely take notice of it. So the next time you watch live TV with ad breaks, count how many ads feature a woman over 50 in a non-token, non-decline, non-anti-aging role. The next time you scroll Instagram, notice who is in your feed and who isn't. And once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. And seeing it's just the first step. So 2, vote with your wallet and tell brands when you do. So when a brand gets it right, tell them. Comment on the post, send that email, tag them. Brands do track this. So praise actually moves the needle inside marketing teams because it gives the people internally who are championing this kind of work the ammunition they need to keep going. Conversely, when a brand gets it wrong, when an ad lands in your feed that makes you feel like you should be vanishing, tell them that too. But not in that whole pile on way, just in a this isn't for me, here's why way. And number 3, if you're a woman over 50 who works in marketing, branding, agency, comms, or anywhere near a creative decision, back yourself. Speak up in the meeting, push back on that brief. Because if 6% of UK agency staff over 50 represents the people who should be advocating for our visibility, we cannot afford for that 6% to stay quiet. The room needs your voice in it. And if you're a business owner, a marketer, or anyone with a brand of your own, I would gently invite you to look at your own imagery this week. Just look. Who's in your shots? Who's in your testimonials? Whose photos are you using? And if your customer base skews 50 plus and your imagery skews 30, you've got a gap. And closing that gap is one of the highest leverage things you can do. So here's what I want to leave you with. The invisible market is a slightly cute name for what is actually a serious and ongoing commercial failure. An entire industry has, more or less collectively, decided that we are not worth the effort, and that decision is costing them money and it is costing us our visibility. But the data is starting to shift, and the Doves and the Kylie Andersons and the over 50 influencers and the founder-led brands built by women in our demographic, they are showing, with cold, hard sales figures, that this market is not just real, but enormous. The question is no longer whether the industry should pay attention. It is whether they will move fast enough. And in the meantime, we get to be louder, we get to be more visible, we get to refuse the script that says we should be quietly disappearing in our 50s and 60s. Because, and I'll say this, we are not declining, we are evolving, and we have the receipts. That's the episode. Thank you for spending your coffee break with me. If this one resonated with you, and especially if a particular stat or moment made you sit up, please do me a favour and share it with one woman in your life who needs to hear it. Forward the link, send it in a group chat, post the episode to your stories. This is exactly the kind of conversation that grows by word of mouth, and you sharing it does more for this podcast than almost anything else. And if you've got a second, hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Leave a rating if the platform lets you. It is genuinely the difference between this podcast being found and not being found, and it costs nothing. A quick housekeeping note. So Unfiltered and Unbound is not sponsored, so nobody is paying me to make this. I do it because I think these conversations matter, and the women having them are not being properly served elsewhere. So if you'd like to support the show and keep it ad free, there's a buy me a coffee link in the show notes. A single coffee from you genuinely helps. And that's not a metaphor, that's actual coffee money that keeps me at the desk. So all of the links and sources behind every stat I have quoted today and the full research report this episode is based on, they'll be in the show notes. And I will see you next time on Unfiltered and Unbound. Until then, go and notice some ads and take up some space.